My name is Didier Laval. I am from France. I currently live and work in the UK, and I'm here working with the Airbus Foundation.
Right. Now, you've been thinking, especially in the UK, about science centers and working with science centers and networks of science centers. So, in the next 5 years, say, what are you imagining that's going to look like? A network of science centers or science center communications broadly?
Definitely networks will flourish a lot. They have been flourishing already a lot in the last 20 years, but they will probably flourish more and gain in complexity because actually we're going much further than science centers, not only science centers, science museums, zoos and aquariums, but also all types of other kinds of engagement professionals are coming into these networks. I'm thinking also about activist fields and many associations which are very involved in social justice, in access to education, which were not necessarily part of the science centers community in the beginning and which are now partnering with us with very fruitful exchanges.
Right. So how does that work in terms of science centers in Canada, in the US, and the UK are funded by governments, right? So if you are taking on an activist role as opposed to, so you're stepping beyond being an advocate for science and being an activist for particular issues, how does that square with getting funding from governments that you may be challenging?
Absolutely. It depends a lot, of course, on different institutions and areas of the world. Some science centers have are funded by government, and that's the main part of their funding. Others have a very more mixed funding scheme and very different business model that gives them maybe more freedom to tackle this. But definitely, there is a thin line on which many institutions are walking, they are taking a stand and they are trying to be very active in order to move some lines, and of course they're also depending on their funders. So there is definitely a kind of political games that is usually led at the senior management level, which is crucial in the management of the science centers, but also in the programs that the science centers will be allowed and will dare to have in order to be a driving force for the future society.
How do you see science centers in the next while being integrated into communities? Certainly you're saying they're being integrated into an activist community, but into neighborhoods, into groups that are interested in advocating for science.
This has also been a global trend, and there are still loads of work to do. Science centers, when they have been created, they were really created as huge venues, usually at the beginning, trying to be linked with the widest number of people, which is great. But we are now realizing how much the very local community of science centers, the very local society is important, and how science centers must be also super relevant. And I'm thinking here, of course, about the latest book of Nina Simon, but how much they should be relevant to their very local community. And they are sometimes really rewriting their mission or reestablishing how this should be understood in order to not be driven only by science in general, but also linking how their science education missions goes with the local neighborhood, the local different stakeholders, and the interest of the place, and how they can add an element building on what's existing here in this local environment.
And also, I guess, communicating in an indigenous way with that community, right?
Absolutely. There are some very interesting works on how not only how welcoming we can be for everyone in the science centers, but also in which ways we communicate things, which language are we using, which content are we communicating, which are the scientists or the non-scientists we are highlighting in our exhibitions. And we have some nice work from academics showing that the very content we're choosing to show and the very language we're choosing to use can be very opening and an incentive for specific local people to come, or can be very exclusive. So there is the start of a reflection in the science centers on how can we make sure our content is as inclusive as possible, and we're just starting to discover how exclusive we may have been in the past.
Right. And how do you think Aztec can help with this kind of community engagement, indigenous engagement?
First of all, I think Aztec is super beneficial in terms of exchanges, because lots of experiments are being held currently in different places of the world, and networks like this enables exchanges of these experiences. I think also Aztec can be a facilitator between the academic world and science centers. Academics can go quite in depth on this topic and give us some great insight about what people who are completely outside the science center field think about science centers. We have some great studies about people who never would step a foot in a science center and what they think about it and how do they perceive an exhibition we're making or a program we're making. So I think ASTEC can be a great facilitator between the academia and between the science centers.
Great. Thank you very much, Didier.